The veil caught fire first. A slow, licking orange at the edge of the silk, barely a whisper at first, until the whole hem glowed like an omen. I didn't scream, I just watched it burn. My maid of honor had left a candle on the vanity, and I must have tossed the veil too close while laughing at something that wasn't funny. It felt symbolic in a way I didn't yet understand. The room smelled like rosewater and smoke, and outside the window, the vineyard lights were flickering like fireflies trying to warn me. Earlier that night, I'd heard my sister giggle about Eli's Seattle surprise, said something about how she still couldn't believe he pulled it off without me. I froze mid-laugh, the kind of laugh you give when you know something's just off, but you haven't figured out the math yet. Wait, I said, keeping my voice light, what Seattle thing? She blinked too many times. Did I say Seattle? I meant Santa Barbara. The winery scout thing. Sorry, I'm tired. But I wasn't tired. I was awake in the wrong part of a dream. The girls stayed in the suite for another hour, peeling off false lashes and clinking pink champagne. I smiled at the right moments, kept my phone face down. But that one word sat at the base of my spine, Seattle, gnawing its way upward like heat rising. At 12:10 a.m., I faked a stomach ache and called an Uber. The dress was already at the venue, the vows were in the cloud, the man I thought I loved was somewhere in a villa across the vineyard, probably asleep. I told myself I just needed air. Closure. Something. The old laptop was where I left it 6 months ago, under the hallway bench, the one with the jammed drawer that never closes right. He always said it was broken, too old to wipe, but too sentimental to toss. I plugged it in, the cord bent at an ugly angle, and watched the screen flicker awake like it didn't want to be touched. His desktop was a mess, screenshots, random folders, photos of us at Big Sur, but in the corner was a folder called Studio. I clicked it, and then I swear I stopped breathing. The messages read like locker room poetry. 5 men, 1 group chat, years of history. They talked about women like poker chips. Ratings. Pros, cons, risk levels. Eli referred to me as loyal, oak-aged, emotionally low risk. A safe bet. That's what I was, a portfolio investment. Then someone replied, but don't you miss the chaos? Attached was a photo. At first I thought it was me. Same hair, same eyes, even the same way I half smiled when unsure. But the background wasn't mine. The bedsheets weren't mine. The city? Seattle. Her folder was labeled S. Dozens of trips. Receipts, hotel bookings, photos. One with Eli's bare chest pressed to hers, time-stamped 2 days before he proposed to me. Another with her holding the watch I gifted him, the same one he told me he left at TSA. I kept scrolling, each file a tiny betrayal, until I opened his calendar and counted 17 Seattle flights in 8 months. While I was planning our future, he was reliving a different life. A life that was wilder, louder, more breakable. More him. At 2:41 a.m., I found the draft. It was titled Forever Vows, S. My hands were shaking, but I opened it anyway. The words weren't meant for me. They were too raw, too desperate, full of private metaphors I didn't understand. You're the match and the burn. You make me feel like I'm not a lie. He never spoke that way to me. With me, he was careful, controlled, grateful. With her, he bled. That's when I realized I wasn't the bride. I was the escape plan. The version he could bring home. I didn't cry. I printed the vows. Folded them into a square. Slipped them into the bouquet wrap hanging on the chair. The fire had gone out by then, the veil a smoking ruin in the sink, the scent of singed fabric thick in the air. I didn't touch it. I just turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and waited for morning. He'd stand across from me at the altar tomorrow. He'd look me in the eyes. And when I handed him those vows, hers, not mine, he'd know. Not because I told him. Because I let him feel what it's like to be rewritten. Before I tell you what I found, before everything burned down around me in a way I never expected, pause with me here. If you've ever doubted what you felt, if you've ever been made to question your own memory, hit like and subscribe. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning, and I want you with me. The morning air felt too clean, like it didn't know what it was waking up into. I stood in the bridal cottage while birds chirped stupidly outside, and the makeup artist kept humming something from Norah Jones. I stared into the mirror as she painted my lips a soft mauve, her fingers steady while mine twitched against the bouquet where I'd folded the vows, her vows, the ones he wrote to someone who wasn't me, and when she asked if I was nervous, I smiled and said, "A little." But the truth is, I'd never felt more awake in my life. My sister burst in holding iced coffee like a peace offering, already in her dusty rose satin, talking a mile a minute about how gorgeous the setup looked, how the violinist had arrived early, how Eli apparently cried when he saw the arbor, and the word cried sat wrong in my chest, like it had nowhere to land. I asked where he was now. She said probably pacing somewhere, being dramatic. Then she leaned in, fixed my earring, whispered, "You're about to be someone's wife, Kira," and I almost laughed, because the sentence felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The wedding planner came next, clipboard in hand, voice sharp but cheerful, confirming the cue for the procession, the switch from cello to acoustic guitar for my walk, and asked if I still wanted to do the private vow reading before the guests were seated. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak, and as everyone buzzed around me, pinning lace, fluffing silk, arranging curls, I held onto that bouquet like it was made of glass, not roses, thinking about how many hands had touched today, how many people had no idea the story they thought they were watching was already over. Eli stood by the fountain when I saw him, his back turned, hands in his pockets, the same blue suit we picked out in spring, the one he said made him feel like a better man, and when he turned and saw me, he smiled so wide it scared me, walked over fast, took my hands in his, said I looked like his future, and I didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just smiled and said, "I have something for you," and before he could say another word, I pulled the folded sheet from the bouquet and slid it into his hand, watching his face carefully. He didn't read it at first, just stared at it like it was a napkin with lipstick, then his eyes dropped to the page, and I watched the moment it changed, the shift from charm to confusion, from confusion to fear, the way his mouth opened slightly on the line that said, "You make me feel like I'm not a lie," and then again on, "I'd rather argue with you than sleep beside peace." He blinked hard, laughed once under his breath, looked at me, asked if this was some kind of joke, but my silence answered for me. He looked around like someone else must be watching, like a camera crew would step out and yell cut, said my name once, twice, then louder, "Kira," voice cracking on the second syllable, and when I still didn't move, he said it again, this time with teeth. "What the hell is this?" And I tilted my head like I was trying to remember something, then said, "I didn't write those," and he just stood there, shoulders rising, falling, the paper crumpling slightly in his hand, and the string quartet began to play in the distance, totally unaware that the groom was unraveling at the seams. "You don't understand," he said, which was funny, because I did. I understood everything now, the trips, the delays, the way he pulled back from me and called it stress, the woman who had my smile but not my name, and the version of him that only came alive when I wasn't in the room. "We were done," he added. It didn't mean anything, but the vows said otherwise, the handwriting said otherwise, and so did the way he still hadn't let go of that paper. Like if he held it long enough he could erase it, fold it backwards, disappear into it. I leaned in like I was about to kiss him, let my voice drop low so only he could hear, and I said, "You can still go through with this, if you want," then pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, "but I don't think she'll like the photos." And before he could say another word, I turned and walked away, past the planner, past the fountain, past the altar, the bouquet still in my hands, the music swelling behind me like a soundtrack to a scene I'd already rewritten in my head 100 times. I didn't leave the venue right away. Instead, I wandered through the vineyard like I was lost in a painting, the wind catching my veil even though I hadn't realized it was still clipped in. Someone called my name twice, but I kept walking until the noise from the music faded behind me, the gravel crunching under my heels like a metronome, and when I reached the far hill where the reception tables sat untouched, I finally stopped, sat on a folding chair, and looked down at my hands, my nails still perfect, painted for a wedding that wasn't happening. A voice called again, this time closer, and when I looked up, it was his mother, still wearing navy and pearls, her face lined with something that wasn't entirely shock, She sat beside me without asking, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You could have told me first," she said, and I laughed, really laughed, because of all the things to say. That was it. And then she added, "I would have helped you disappear more gracefully, like this was a party I had ruined by bleeding on the carpet." And I turned to her, asked quietly, "How long have you known?" She didn't lie, didn't deflect, just whispered, "Since Seattle," and that told me everything. Told me she knew before the engagement, before the cake tastings and the venue walkthroughs, before the fittings and the bridal shower. And still she smiled for photos and toasted to my future like I was the perfect accessory to her son's clean slate. "I thought he'd end it," she said softly. "I thought you were stability," and I nodded, because I'd always been that for men like him, the final girl, the afterthought dressed like a reward. Later, back at the suite, I peeled off the wedding dress slowly, not in sadness, but like shedding something I didn't want to carry back home. The zipper stuck halfway, so I called my sister to help, and when she came in, her face crumpled before I could speak. "I didn't know," she said immediately. "I swear I didn't. I just thought he was being romantic or secretive. I thought maybe it was a surprise for you." And I believed her, because the fear in her eyes wasn't the fear of being caught. It was the fear of being part of something that hurt me. We sat cross-legged on the floor, dress pulled beside us, and she asked, "So what now?" Like there was a script I was supposed to follow, but all I could say was, "I don't know," because I didn't, because I was too tired to make a plan, too full of static to cry. And then her phone buzzed, and she held it up slowly, saying, "You need to see this." And it was a message request from someone named Sasha, a woman with a familiar smile and a profile picture taken in the same bed I'd seen in the Seattle photos. The message read, "I think we've both been lied to," and included screenshots, dozens of them, full of voice notes and photos, timestamps that overlapped with holidays, texts that mirrored the same things he sent me, just shifted slightly, same structure, same rhythm. Like he was copy-pasting love, and I felt sick but calm, like watching a storm through double-pane glass, like I wasn't even the one in the photo anymore, just a ghost looking at her own unfinished life from outside the frame. I messaged her back, just 2 words, "Call me." And she did, her voice thinner than I expected, like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks, and we didn't argue or compare notes. We just listened, confirmed timelines, stitched our shared heartbreak together like a patchwork we didn't ask to wear. And she told me she loved him once, deeply, recklessly, that she thought I was the threat, that he said I was controlling, traditional, boring, and I laughed at that, too, not because it was funny, but because it was easier than crying. At the end of the call, she said, "I hope you leave him," and I told her I already did, and we sat in that silence like 2 women on opposite sides of a mirror, both touched by the same hand, both left with fingerprints in the same place. And after we hung up, I lay back on the suite floor, the wedding dress beside me like a collapsed tent, and I stared at the ceiling until morning came through the curtains, thinking only this: there is a version of me out there that still believes in him, and I feel sorry for her. It started quietly, the unraveling, like soft fabric pulled from a seam you didn't know was loose. I was drinking burnt hotel coffee in the lobby lounge when the first bridesmaid walked in, hair still curled, dress still pressed. She didn't speak at first, just sat across from me and said, "People are saying you ran," and I took a sip, said calmly, "I didn't run, I walked." Her eyes softened, like maybe she wanted to believe me, and I handed her the folded vows, the same ones he read by the fountain, still creased like truth pressed into paper. She read them slowly, mouth moving but silent, and when she was done, she folded them again, tighter this time, hands trembling slightly. "Did he really write this for someone else?" I nodded, and she looked down at her shoes, said, "I always thought you two were." "I don't know, real," and I shrugged, because we were, just not in the way people mean. We were real in the way a staged photo is real, posed, practiced, pretty from a distance, but hollow when you tap the frame. She didn't cry, but she reached for my hand, and we sat like that for a while. By the time Eli showed up, the staff had already started clearing the altar, folding chairs stacked in quiet apology. He found me by the side entrance, still in my silk robe, talking to a cousin I barely liked, and when I saw his face, pale and stunned and somehow angry, I stood before he could speak, told my cousin to give us a minute, and he waited until the door shut before saying, "You humiliated me," and I smiled, not mockingly, just tired, said, "I gave you your words back." And he didn't get it. You could see it in his face. "You didn't have to make a scene," he said, and I blinked slowly, then asked, "What part was the scene? The part where you told me I was your piece, or the part where you told her you'd rather fight with her than grow old with me?" And he flinched at that, because repetition hurts more the second time. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly, like movement could explain something, said, "You don't understand what she was," and I said, "She wasn't me." And he nodded like that was supposed to make it better, like that was the point. My sister came in halfway through, said she heard raised voices, said people were starting to talk, and Eli turned to her, asked if she'd known, if she had anything to do with what happened, and her face twisted in disbelief. "Don't drag me into this," she said. "You lied to both of us," and he tried to argue, but she cut him off, voice shaking. "She could have married you, Eli. She could have loved you for the rest of her life, and you would have used that love like furniture, something nice to have. Until you got bored again, and then she left," heels clicking like punctuation. Later, at the airport, I saw a girl wearing the same perfume Sasha wore, the same one that lingered on his hoodie once when he said he'd been with his brother, and it hit me how many details I'd overlooked. How many excuses I'd accepted because they were wrapped in warmth, in routine. I checked into a hotel near the terminal, not ready to fly, not ready to go home. I texted Sasha once, said only, "He blames me," and she replied, "Of course he does. It's easier than blaming himself," and I didn't write back. I didn't have to. I stayed in that hotel for 2 days, watching movies I didn't care about, ordering soup I barely touched, answering texts from people asking if I was okay, if there'd be a ceremony later, if this was a rehearsal prank, and I sent short replies, polite, measured, saying thank you, saying I'm fine, until someone sent me a photo, one I hadn't seen before. It was of Eli and Sasha, last winter, arms wrapped around each other at a Christmas market, smiling like the world hadn't caught up to them yet. And I stared at it for a long time, not angry, just hollow. Before I checked out, I wrote a letter, not to Eli, not to Sasha, but to myself, the girl who stayed through the silences, the cancellations, the edited truths. I told her she deserved better than being someone's placeholder. Better than being described as low risk in a chat with men who'd never know her heart, and I folded it, left it in the drawer beside the bed, like a relic, like proof that I was here once, and then I picked up my bag, walked out of that room, and didn't look back. Not because it hurt less, but because I finally believed it happened. 2 months later, I passed Eli in the produce section of the grocery store near my old apartment. He was holding a bag of lemons, wearing a shirt I'd once picked out for him, and when he saw me, he smiled like nothing had happened. Like we were just old classmates or neighbors, not two people who almost exchanged vows in front of 117 guests. I raised my brow slightly, and he said, "Hey, you look good," and I replied, "I feel fine," which wasn't a lie exactly, just a shortcut to keep walking. He didn't try to follow, didn't ask for a second chance or explanation. He just stood there with those lemons like he'd forgotten why he came in. And I thought briefly about how strange it was to build a life with someone and then become strangers in under 5 seconds. I kept walking until I was back in the parking lot, where I sat in my car with the engine running, hands on the wheel. Breathing like I'd just run a mile, not because I was upset, but because it felt like bumping into a version of myself I'd outgrown. Sasha and I still talk sometimes, nothing heavy, just check-ins, small things. She sent me a photo of a lamp she saw at a flea market, said it looked like something I'd like, and I told her she was probably right. We don't talk about him much anymore. There's no point. She left him too, before I even boarded my flight home. She told me she packed her things and disappeared while he was out trying to salvage our wedding guest's sympathy, said he looked shocked when he came home to silence, like betrayal only makes sense when it happens to him. My parents ask sometimes if I ever hear from him, and I say no, which is true, but what I don't tell them is that I still keep the vow book in a drawer, the one he wrote for her, the one I printed and folded and carried to the altar like a secret. I don't keep it to reread it. I don't keep it to remember him. I keep it to remember myself, to remember the version of me who stood still and let someone else narrate her story. I keep it as proof that I left. The dress went to consignment, the veil was tossed, the shoes I wore that day ended up in a donation bin outside a church I never entered, and the apartment we were meant to move into now belongs to a couple I've never met. I thought leaving would be loud, dramatic, a crash, but it was the quietest decision I've ever made, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long, like realizing the fire has already passed through and all that's left now is ash that no longer burns. There's someone new in my life, nothing serious, just someone who asks good questions and listens carefully, who doesn't flinch when I take too long to answer, who doesn't push when I go quiet for entire conversations. I haven't told him much yet. I don't feel rushed to. He once asked what happened with my last relationship, and I said, it ended before it began, and he nodded, didn't pry, just poured more coffee and changed the subject, and somehow that felt like the safest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. I don't believe everything heals. I don't think time wipes people clean. I still check my reflection twice some mornings, still think of what I missed, what I gave, what I let slide, but it doesn't hollow me out anymore. It just lives beside me. Like something I used to carry that I've since learned to walk beside. I don't forgive him, but I don't relive him either. He's just a name, a lesson, a voice I no longer respond to. And when people ask if I regret anything, I say this. Some days, I still dream in vows, still remember the way he looked at me with borrowed affection, still wake up thinking I could have tried harder, loved louder, fought less, but then I remember the moment at the altar, the paper in his hand. His voice breaking not because he was losing me, but because he'd finally been seen, and I remind myself I didn't light anything on fire that day, but I didn't have to. He lit the match. I just stopped pretending I couldn't smell the smoke.